You remember the Prime Minister last December thought that he could buy off our race warriors by changing one word of our national anthem, just like some were demanding. He changed the words young and free. We now sing one and free. And even the media left back then said, well, that was great. That finally acknowledges that Aborigines were here first, were not that young. But that's not quite how the race game works, as I keep pointing out. Every demand is simply another step towards the next, and all that until we reach apartheid. And sure enough, 7 months later, just 7 months, on a website published by Canterbury University, we get this. Fair go, why the national anthem is racist, still. And it's written by a former long-time Greens candidate, 4 times she's been a Greens candidate, who says the very name of the anthem, Advance Australia Fair, is racist because the word fair is almost certainly a play on words, a racist play on words, she says. You know, fair, wink, wink. It doesn't just mean, you know, being just. It means being white. But the Greens don't just see racism in everything to do with the anthem. They actually hate the idea of anything that would unify us as one. As she says, even the Prime Minister's new wording, one and free, just compounds the problems because it forces singular identity on us, on what has always been the diversity expected of a continent. I'm not sure who expects that, but there you go. So we can no longer think of ourselves as one. We are a nation of tribes, as I've long warned. And if you want an example of that, check the video on the website of the Milton Public School in New South Wales of children celebrating the Olympic Games by dividing into teams from various countries. It's all very nice, all lovely, the kids having a good time, nice kids, no problem, except for this. Australia is fielding 2 teams at this school, divided by race, one Aboriginal team and the other the Australian team. Joining me is Mark Latham, former federal Labor leader and now One Nation leader in the New South Wales Parliament. Mark Latham, we are dividing, or being divided, it's probably more accurate, into tribes, aren't we?
Yeah, no doubt. And you look at the Milton Public School, an Olympic parade there last month, innocent and joyful for the children, but also divisive when the teachers gone out of their way to say the Indigenous kids have got a parade under a nation called Aboriginal and the not Indigenous are under a nation called Australia. And this division, Andrew, for the minds of little kids, you know, is quite bad because students with logic would say, well, if Aboriginal's a different nation, they can raise their own taxes, they can go and solve their own problems. And we shouldn't be encouraging young Australians to think of each other on the basis of racial boundaries and division. There's one Australian nation. We competed at the Olympics, and whether they're male, female, black or white, straight, gay, whatever, we all celebrated their success, from Peter Bowl in the running to, you know, the magnificent swimmers and everyone else. So what's wrong with uniting around an event like the Olympics? And the fact that a public school in New South Wales couldn't do that and paraded an Indigenous Aboriginal nation separate from the Australian nation, I think is a major worry.
Well, I think it's even a bigger worry. It points to this bigger worry because this pandemic, Mark, I think is showing us the dangers of this kind of extreme multiculturalism, you know, this dividing into tribes, which has been accelerated by mass immigration, of course. We now have almost 1 million people, according to the previous census, who speak no English or bad English. And in Sydney, this pandemic is actually worse in those suburbs where there are a very high number of migrants, where our politicians say they are struggling to get out their health messages because of the language barrier, and also struggling to get them obeyed. Even the ABC yesterday admits this.
The Canterbury Bankstown area has been consistently recording more than 70 locally acquired cases a day, much higher than other councils. Dr Fariha Dib is a family GP in Lakemba.
I think we haven't done a great job connecting with these communities. I know that New South Wales Health and Department of Health have some great resources in multiple languages, but I think we need more. We need people that are connected to the communities.
Victoria, exactly the same problem, Mark. The virus was worse in suburbs with very, very multicultural and language problems again. What does this teach us?
Well, what it says, Andrew, is that all the woke virtue signalling PC language and activities of the Berejiklian government, the whole public sector in New South Wales is built around woke PC hidden truths. You're not allowed to talk about real cultural diversity, that some groups don't speak English and some groups don't obey the rule of law as much as others. All of that is forbidden in New South Wales, which means the basic truth of this disaster, this catastrophe in our state, particularly in Sydney, is that this government foolishly thought a lockdown in Western Sydney, places like Fairfield and Cumberland and Canterbury, would be exactly the same as the northern beaches of Sydney earlier this year, when middle-class people with ocean views sat there, English skills, sat there working from home, enjoyed their Christmas break and complied with all the health orders. But you go out to a place like Canterbury where the English language skills are paltry. I did a video 4 years ago in Fairfield. I only found 1 out of 10 people on the street who could speak English. Well, you've got an obvious communication problem. If people don't know the health orders, they're certainly not going to comply with them. But Andrew, I think this lack of English speaking skills sends another powerful message that's all wrong. And if you come to a country and they don't expect you or require you to speak the language of that nation, you probably think to yourself, well, this place hasn't got many rules. This place hasn't got many expectations of my citizenship. They pay welfare. I don't have to speak the language. I'm going to do what I like. And that has been the pattern, unfortunately, of people not following the health orders, not doing the right thing. And large parts of New South Wales now, millions of people are locked down for these particular problems, which have been swept under the carpet. The Labor members have ignored it. Chris Bowen there, in response to my video in Fairfield, said, oh, wonderful community, nothing to see here. Well, we're seeing a lot there. We're seeing a lot there today. And it's not a great credit to what's gone on. Liberals don't know about it because they're on the other side of Sydney. This has been a hidden problem that's festered for way too long. And people like you and me get in trouble. All we've been doing is speaking honestly about the nature of the problem. And boy, hasn't the problem come home to roost with tragic, tragic outcomes.
Absolutely, particularly for those communities themselves. They're the ones that are being worst hit by the virus. And you're right. I mean, I had the Australian Press Council when I pointed out this same problem in Melbourne, saying that I was, offensive. I mean, really? I mean, the Press Council, what a menace to free speech and now to public health. But there's also a question that you raised. Now, Mark, I don't want to be too simplistic about this. We are also talking about other things like job insecurity, the poorer suburbs, denser suburbs. There are also inherent problems there that have facilitated the spread of the virus in particularly these areas. But there's also the question of different values, which people don't want to talk about. We saw, in fact, though, New South Wales Health Minister Brad Hazzard complaining that indeed some communities, some people of other backgrounds, he said, don't seem to believe in following the rule of law or showing consideration to the rest of us. Here he is.
There are other communities, other people from other backgrounds who don't seem to think that it's necessary to comply with the law and who don't really give great consideration to what they do in terms of its impact on the rest of the community.
This was acknowledged also by a sheikh in Sydney, Sheikh Azam Mesto, who, to his great credit, has tried his best to get out the health message. He agreed that there could be less cooperation, generally speaking, among certain communities because we're generally people, he said, who have a stronger custom, and that's just a little bit harder to break. Mark, doesn't this tell us that this idea that diversity makes us stronger is not quite true, and our challenge is to build more unity and a deeper sense of community of one community?
Well, it goes to that question, Andrew. What is a community? You said sense of community. What does that actually mean? Well, to be a community, you must share things in common. And the most important thing to share in common is a language, English, in our country, where we can communicate with each other, cross boundaries, get to know each other, build a common sense of nationhood and purpose. And the other thing about cultural diversity, at its extreme, it fragments society. And the truth is, in that diversity, there are some people who, for cultural reasons, follow the rule of law and others who don't. And that's just a reality that needs to be confronted in a crisis. A pandemic is a crisis, and we're paying a price here for that. And it's well and good for Brad Hazzard to be talking about people of other backgrounds. Why couldn't this government be honest with us from day one? You know, if they thought that, it's 7 weeks too late, given the catastrophe of what's unfolded in Sydney and beyond.
That's right.
But, you know, I was saying it on day one. I know people in that community in public life who were saying it on day one. But, Andrew, the whole veil and intimidation and and censorship
People
of political
are too
correctness has meant that
scared,
people have
Mark.
been scared to speak the truth, and we are now paying the price for
Absolutely.
that in spades.
Well, these very people, these very communities, and I hate using the word communities, which should be one, they're paying the price more than anyone else. Thank you very much for your time, Mark Latham.